your video on, go ahead and turn it off. I'll go ahead and turn mine off too. It just makes it easier for bandwidth, especially if people live like I do usually in the country. So anyways, pollinator friendly garden, be good. I love the title, and I can't take credit for that, but I do think it's a cool idea. So why do we need pollinators? I was talking with a really well-known gentleman who has done an awful lot of really good work with pollinators. And he had this beautiful slide that he let me borrow. And I love it because it says like, this is your diet with just a wind. And to me, you know, when you think about it, it's not enough. It's not enough. But over here to the right, you can see this is your diet with pollinators, where you have so many beautiful things to see and so many tasty things to eat, which is just spectacular. Okay, so with pollinators, if you go down to dollars and cents, and a lot of people like to do this, and I'm not a dollars and cents person, but I like to put this in also because I think a lot of people appreciate the difference in knowing things. So basically, 87 out of 115 food crops need pollinators to pollinate. And when you think about it, if we didn't have the pollinator crops, we wouldn't have food for about $200 billion. So basically, every time you're eating something like a watermelon, that adds up so that you can go ahead and enjoy your watermelon. But if you didn't have it, we would be losing that much money. 78% of the plants that do need pollination, some of them are wind pollinated ones, but they still do much better if they have real pollination too. So what do we need in terms of pollinators? Well, obviously bees, and there's so many different types of bees. And then there's the mimic bees. So these two pictures are different type of syrphid flies, which are also called hover or flower flies. And they mimic a bee, but they only have one set of wings. And the reason why they're so good at pollinating is they have a lot of different parts of them that sort of mimic a bee in that sense too. They adore flowers, they go for the nectar, and they also move around a lot of the pollen, and that's important for pollination. Why is this so slow? There we go. So when you're talking about pollinators, I decided to go ahead and take a look at all the different type of bees you could have, and it's like, oh my Lord. Mining bees, these are the ones that we have an awful lot in Maryland. They like really sandy soil. And so if you have heavy clay soil, you probably don't have mining bees. But if you have sandy or loamy soil, you probably do have them. And what they do is it's just a female bee digs a little hole in the ground. They're very solitary usually. And she lays an egg and puts a little ball of pollen for the little egg to, when it hatches out, to have something to eat. And that's what they do. I mean, they have a very short life, but they do pollinate while they're around. Now, squash bees, on the other hand, they're also solitary, they're also minor, but they do an awful lot of good for us, and it's something we can count on them. Then there's the ones that nest in holes, like the leafcutter bees. There's also the mason bees, the blue orchard bees, and the carpenter bees. So like, for instance, if you've ever seen those really cool little bee houses that have all these little holes in them, I meant to get a picture of that, but you know how time flies. Anyways, those are the ones that would absolutely love to be in those little holes. And then there's also the sweat bees, which are a little different. And then the foraging bees. So the squash bee is a mining bee, but it's also a foraging bee. And this is a bee that actually goes out and really looks for different things. So the blueberry bee, the azalea bee, the globe mallow bee, and the bumblebee are all what they call foraging bees. And these are all our native bees. Okay, so honeybees. Some people still think that honeybees are native and we should only plant all native plants because of the honeybees. Well, honeybees are from Europe. They were brought in from Europe with people who were coming across on boats as they were like the pilgrims in a sense, but they were the first people who decided to check it out. And they were very brave to get into a boat and sail across the ocean that took months to get across. And There was no real sure idea that where you were going to land. They just sort of hoped that they got to the right place around the right time. But after a while, people realized that they could go ahead and do things like they could bring their own plants, and a lot of them brought apple trees and peach trees and that sort of thing that are not native to the United States, but they were used to eating apples. Apples are a huge crop. I mean, they would take apples and make apple cider, which was probably the safest thing to drink in Europe. But we had a lot of good water here. So anyways, the honeybees were bought from Europe. They are very good at pollination. And you can see on the, let me see if I can do this. I'm very new at this thing with, let's see, it's not going to work for me. Anyways, you can see on the bee's back leg, you can see that there's a pollen, a yellow dot area on the back leg, and that's the pollen. But when you think about the European bees, they have a tendency to fly late in the morning. They're not early risers. So they miss a lot of the early stuff. They don't like to fly in cloudy weather. If it's raining, forget about it. They're not going to fly in that. If the wind is over 15 miles per hour, they don't feel comfortable doing that either. And they're certainly not going to get out and play and visit the flowers if it's not 55 degrees or hotter. Now, the reason why I say all that is that our native bees are much hardier, and they will come out and they'll fly in cloudy weather. And they will fly if the wind is really high. And they'll fly when the temperatures are cool because they have things to do and flowers to get to. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the vegetables that we have and whether they're pollinating or non-pollinating. So with vegetables, there are some that are self-pollinating. So beans are mostly self-pollinating. But if you have bees, they will go ahead and help with the pollination. So the broad beans, those are like the string beans and all that kind of stuff. I mean, broad beans are the larger ones. You actually need bumblebees to pollinate them. Now, the runner bees, I think they're pretty cool. You can have bees, the bumblebees help with that, and so do the honeybees. But the hummingbirds also pollinate those. Now, green beans, for the most part, are just self-pollinating. But again, you can have the honeybee as well as the bumblebee helping out. And sometimes just the extra visit by the bee helps with the pollination. Beets, you don't ever think of beets needing any kind of pollinators. And when you think about it, really, you probably don't need the beets for the actual vegetable because the vegetable is found in the root. But it's just sort of amazing to find out when I was doing some research on it that thrips, which are these little guys on the far, far right, they are thrips. And thrips, for the most part, are considered a bad bug to have on your plants because they actually feed on the plant tissue. But in this case, the flowers of the thrips are actually pollinated. The flowers of the beets are pollinated by thrips. The serpent fly, again, this is the one that they call a flower fly or a hover fly. They also help. And then both the honeybees and the solitary bees. And since I was talking about solitary bees, I have these two solitary bees over here. They're one on top of the other. So you can see that they come in all different colors and shapes and that sort of stuff. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Cabbage is, again, self-pollinated, and it didn't eat anybody. And carrots are also self-pollinated, but with carrots, you can have what's called the blue bottle fly or the carrot fly. And here's the flower right here of the carrot. So the carrot flower is actually edible and kind of fun to eat. But both of them don't seem to mind having the honeybee come by and help too. So it's neat to know that even though they're self-pollinated, they can still help out. Cucumbers, they definitely need the honeybees. They prefer the honeybees, but cucumbers are not from the United States. Eggplants are also self-pollinating. They're in the Solanaceous family, but they don't mind having a bumblebee stop by. And ground cherries, again, they are self-pollinating too, but they also have a flower that accepts a lot of the bees too. So I have on the bottom the flower as well as the fruit of the cucumbers, the eggplants, and the ground cherries. The ground cherry flowers are really kind of pretty. Okay, melons. Melons are interesting. Melons are vines, and they could be like cantaloupe, honeydew, watermelon. They have both male and female flowers on the same vine. And a lot of people will say, oh my gosh, my plant has all these flowers, but they're not making any fruit. Well, that's because the first flowers that are formed on the vines are actually the male flowers. And that's kind of to get a way to enhance the bees to come and visit because the pollen is there. Within a week, the female flowers will go ahead and start to bloom. So here you're going to have male and female flowers on the same plant. Now, quite often when you have that, you still need to have cross-pollination, but most of the melons are very good about being self-fertile, meaning the male pollen from the same plant can fertilize the female on the same plant. So here we have the honeybees, we have some native bees, and of course the bumblebee too. Okra is again self-pollinating, but it really likes the bumblebees too. Now peas, they're kind of fun. Peas are self-pollinating when the flowers are closed. And that's really good for genetics. A lot of times they'll go ahead and when they're doing research, they want to be able to go ahead and pollinate when they want. And they can go ahead and use peas for that reason because they can go ahead and open it up, pollinate it, and then close it up. Cross-pollination happens when the pea flowers actually open up, and you can go ahead and have bees and that sort of stuff. So bumblebees and butterflies actually also help peas be pollinated. Peppers are also from America, more the southern part, but they are also wind pollinated. When you think about where the peppers first got started, they were far in the far west and pretty windy out there. So that could be a good idea. But also bees, beetles, and some animals actually help pollinate peppers. Now, I couldn't figure out which animals did, but that was in the some of the papers that I was reading, which I thought was fascinating. Now, potatoes. Again, these are a plant that was actually indigenous to the Americas, and they were brought over to Europe. So the picture we have in the far left is an actual potato plant that was planted from a potato that had one eye, and we put it in, and it is growing right now. I just took that picture yesterday. So it can't go outside until it gets warmer, but notice how nice and green it is, and it is growing like crazy. So I think we're gonna have to repot the thing. But the flowers of the potatoes are, like I said, in the Solanaceae family, so they look very, very similar to the pepper flowers also, don't they? You can have them white or this really pretty blue color. And both the honeybees and the bumblebees do a really good job. And I was trying to see if this would work. Oh, it works. So see what he's doing? He's buzzing the flower to get the pollen. Isn't that the coolest thing in the world? Oh, I'm so glad it worked. That's how the bumblebees make sure that they get a lot of pollen. Now, when it comes to pumpkins, look at all the different bees that can pollinate pumpkins. You have the honeybee, the bumblebee, the squash bees. Remember, pumpkins are a vine. Carpenter bees, the carpenter bees, though. Okay, these guys can pollinate these things, but they also have a tendency to cheat. So what they'll do is if they're in a hurry or they're hungry or they just don't want to have to deal with the flower not opening large enough, they'll actually cut into the flower to get to the nectar, totally bypassing the pollen altogether and just slurping up that nectar. Then there's the cuckoo bee, the longhorn bees, and sweat bees, and they all do a real good job. So this guy right here, let me see if I can do this. Oh, anyways, okay, bee number one is the carpenter bee. And you can tell how different he is from a regular bee because a carpenter bee has a shiny backside instead of a fuzzy backside. And the second one right here, number two, this is a cuckoo bee. And number three is a longhorn bee. And number four is a sweat bee. Okay, radishes. Again, who needs radishes, flowers and all that kind of stuff? Because you usually eat the radishes, which are gorgeous right here. But when you do have the flowers, you can have pollinators who will go ahead and pollinate them. So you have butterflies that will pollinate them, bees, and these little teeny flies that stop by and visit them. And the fact that the flies visit them sort of says to me, maybe they smell kind of funky. Squash. Well, obviously the squash bee is the one that actually pollinates the squash bee, but so does the honeybee. And what the reason why the squash bee does such a good job compared to the honeybee is the flowers of the squash open up at daylight. As soon as the sun comes up, those flowers swirl open, and the squash bee will come right in and get right to work. Whereas, and the thing is, the flowers only last until noon. So they get all their work done. And then the honeybee comes by around 10 o'clock in the morning, and they kind of look around going, well, this looks like a good place. How's it look? It looks like nobody's been here. Let me check it out. What I think is interesting, though, is when honeybees have been visiting a flower and pollinated the flower, they actually leave a like electronic signature that allows the other honeybees to know when they come by, oh, that's already been pollinated. So there's really good and bad about that. Okay, sweet potatoes. Once again, you really don't need flowers on the sweet potatoes because these are a tuber, underground, and all that sort of stuff. But the flower is very, very pretty, and you do have a lot of things that come to it. So you have the bumblebee, you have the carpenter bee, which is right here, and you have the sweat bee, which is this really beautiful, bright green bee. Okay, tomatoes, again, they are very self-pollinating in a way, but the bees, the bumblebees, are really good about doing the buzz that really has a tendency to get the pollen going all over the place. And there's also something called a mud bee and a sweat bee. They all help with it. And I do know that when I was doing some research on edible flowers and I planted some edible flowers really close to the tomato plants, I got the best pollination and I had the tastiest tomatoes. So it's always good to do that. Okay, so watermelon, once again, the honeybee and the bumblebee. Now, I was talking with a friend of mine who's a local beekeeper, and he has lots of beehives. When he brings the beehives into the watermelon field, and this is a seedless watermelon field, he will go ahead and bring a hive that is probably 80 pounds. And when you're talking about dealing with seedless watermelon, you have 5 rows of seedless watermelon plants and then 1 or 2 rows of seeded watermelon for the cross-pollination. The bumblebee and the honeybee will both go ahead and do the pollinating, but by the time that the field is done and pollinated for the seedless watermelon, the hive that weighed 80 pounds at the beginning of the crop is now down to 30. So they work really hard and they're not really getting too terribly much, which is really hard. Interesting is they also have wasps, flies, and then the other thing that they said is if you plant mustard greens nearby, you will attract a lot of the pollinators that are needed, that are just local native pollinators. So it's always kind of fun to learn new things. Now, herbs, oh my gosh, herbs are wonderful. They're wonderful because they bring in the pollinators. They'll bring in a lot of the butterflies like dill, fennel, celery, and cilantro are fabulous for butterflies. The plants that are in the sunflower family, like artichoke, lettuce, chicory, and chamomile, they can take different types of pollinators. Peas and beans are the legume families. They don't really need them, but they don't mind the pollinators. Usually the bees is what they like. And then the family that has the lavender, basil, rosemary, sage, and oregano, they definitely need both bees as well as butterflies. And then the family of cabbages and kale, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, they like all of the butterflies too. And that's, you often see the cabbage butterfly around them, which does more damage, but that's okay. Okay, getting into herbs. I love herbs, so I'm going to share these with you guys too. So what I like to tell people when they're planting a vegetable garden, you should always plant a lot of different flowers to attract the pollinators before the first tomato sets, before the first tomato even flowers. So there's some plants you can plant early in the springtime that will bloom an awful lot. And a lot of them happen to be herbs. And some herbs are longer lasting than others. So these are not in order of how they bloom, but these are just basic in alphabetical order. So anise and anise hyssop are wonderful for both bees as well as butterflies. They have very, very small flowers and easy for a bee to get into them, and great for, again, for butterflies, a lot of the pollinators. This is bee balm with multiple little flowers. Now this would actually bring in pollinators like hummingbirds. This right here is borage. This is one of the edible flowers that I was working with when I was doing my edible flower research. And when I had borage on either side of a tomato plant, I had the best pollination. And when I've gone ahead and shared that with people, they say to me, I can never find borage flowers. It is an annual. And if you can find them, they are worth finding. They're a lot of fun. And they really help with a lot of the different pollination of vegetables. Calendula. Now, this is a flower that actually is also edible too, but it also brings in a lot of the early and late pollinators. Calendula doesn't like the heat of summer. As a matter of fact, if you plant it in the springtime, it will thrive in the spring. And unless you give it afternoon shade, it will die in the heat of the summer. If you give it a little bit of afternoon shade, it'll come back again in the fall. Catmint. Now, this is not catnip, but this is catmint. It has really beautiful little blue flowers, again, great for pollinators. And chamomile is beautiful by the shape of it. It's the daisy shape. So the ray petals, which are the white petals right here, they're kind of like a way to say to the pollinators, hey, guys, come right here. And right in the center is where your feast is. So the ray petals are like the fancy ones, the neon thing that's saying, come on over, we're having a party here. The smorgasbord is being served. So the pollinators can land on the daisy, and all the center part, the bright golden one right here, that's where the true flowers are with the nectar and the pollen. And that makes it really nice for most of the pollinators where they don't have to walk very far. The buffet is right there. They can go ahead and spend a lot of time on one flower and then go very quickly to another flower. That's what your pollinators truly love. Now, dill is another plant also that has beautiful flowers. This is what they call an umbel shape. So you have lots of little teeny flowers on little teeny umbrellas and then all put together on one great big umbrella. And whenever your dill or fennel is in bloom, oh my goodness, the amount of buzz that you can hear is pretty cool. Echinacea is also considered an herb. And again, you have this beautiful ray petals that are bright, and they're sterile, but they still have they do a great job of saying to the pollinators, here's where dinner is. And all of these really cool little spiky flowers right here are the true flowers. And these are the fertile ones. Hyssop is a bright blue. And if you notice that I have a bee on it, bees do like colors and they like blue an awful lot. So hyssop is just a nice spiky plant with little teeny blue flowers, easy for the pollinators to get to. Lavender. What's not to say lovely about lavender? I just love it when it blooms. It has a couple of things that it requires. It requires really, really dry soil, especially in the wintertime, and full sun. And if you can go ahead and provide really good, excellent drainage in the wintertime and full sun in the summertime, you'll have lavender that will survive for years. I have lavender that's at least 40 years old, which is wonderful. And this is my lavender plant right here with these beautiful little butterflies saying, oh, good, finally, she brought out the feast. Marjoram, okay, that's another herb. And it's a little bit like oregano, but more of an annual in this area. And it has little teeny flowers. And then there's the Mexican mint marigold, which is actually a type of marigold, and the flowers are edible on that. Some more mints, some more herbs is the mountain mint. Now this, anytime you're talking about a true mint, like the mountain mint, this can go ahead and become very invasive in the sense that it will spread all over the place. I like to plant my mints in a large pot that I've cut the bottom out, and I have the plant partially up in the air, partially into the soil so that they can go ahead and survive over the winters. But it also keeps the plant from just visiting all the other parts of my garden. What I love about this picture of the mountain mint is you have bees visiting and you also have butterflies visiting. Whenever the mountain mint is in bloom, it is a true pollinator magnet. And plus, it's a very pretty plant too. Now, here is Greek oregano when it's in bloom. It has a beautiful purple flower, very, very nice. And it blooms in the summer. This is prostrate rosemary. And rosemary, whether it's upright or prostrate, it blooms in the late fall and into the winter. And sometimes it blooms in the early springtime also. So it's kind of fun to see the little blue flowers on the dark green. Now, rue is an herb that you really have to be careful with. There are some people who, when they touch rue, it looks like it's burned their skin. It's not one you can eat. It does have beautiful yellow flowers and it's great for pollinators. But I think unless you really, really want it, I would not use rue in my garden. Sage, on the other hand, oh my goodness, yes. There's culinary sages that are really, really good. There's a lot of beautiful sages that are very colorful. But if you want the culinary sage, you're going to have these gorgeous blue flowers, which is real pretty. And thyme, again, it has little teeny flowers. These flowers are almost too small to worry about, but when they're in bloom, the bees are all over it. And also there's valerian. It comes red and also white. Not native to us. Most of these herbs are not native, but the pollinators absolutely love them. Okay, now when you're talking about herbs, you should also try to have some herbs you can go ahead and plant, knowing that they're going to be eaten to pieces by the larvae of some of the pollinators. I would say this would be for the caterpillars. So dill and fennel are different because fennel is a perennial and dill is an annual. But the butterflies don't seem to mind either way. They will go ahead and eat all the foliage. Well, excuse me, the adults will go ahead and lay the eggs and visit the flowers, and the same for the parsley. And when the eggs hatch out, they will devour the dill, they'll devour the fennel, and they'll devour the parsley. So what I suggest for people who love parsley, which I truly do also, I keep 2 or 3 plants inside on my kitchen window, and all the ones that are outside, I let the critters have them because they will definitely enjoy them. Okay, so what you should plant to attract the pollinators? Well, first of all, you have to remember that you want to have pollinators all through the growing season. So you have to have things that will flower in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall. The other thing you're going to have is lots of color because every pollinator sees things differently. Bees like the blues and the violets, but they'll go to other things too. Butterflies like the reds and yellows, but again, they'll visit other flowers too. Some pollinators have a great sense of smell. Bees go to fragrant flowers that smell really, really good. Flies go to flowers that really stink. One of the plants that I think is crazy is the Bradford pear, which I do not want anyone to plant at all. But in the early springtime, when it's in flower, if you bring the flowers inside, all of a sudden you'll wonder what in the world died in your house. That smells horrible, but that's because that particular plant is pollinated by flies that like smelly things. You also want to have flowers that have different sizes and shapes like landing pads and flat flowers like the echinacea or the black-eyed Susan or tubular flowers like the snapdragon. You also want to have lots of different sizes and shapes. So once again, here is the dill flowers with the umbels right there. Right here is the spike flowers that come up and they bloom from the bottom all the way to the top. So this is Veronica right here. This is Aquilegia or Columbine, and hummingbirds love this in the early springtime, but so do the butterflies. This is a salvia, and you can get through it. Bees can get into it, but a lot of times you'll use it for butterflies. And this is goldenrod with, look at that, a honeybee on the goldenrod, which they absolutely love. So different sizes, different shapes, different times of bloom. You also want to go ahead and plant your flowers in large groups. You don't want to have like 1 or 2 flowers. You want to have a block of flowers. It doesn't have to be the same plant at all, but at least 3 to 5 of one plant, 3 to 5 of another plant, 3 to 5 of another plant. So you have blooming plants and they're all kind of together. It actually makes it easier to mow your lawn around. It makes it easier to weed and take care of things. It doesn't have to be in straight lines. As you see, either one of these gardens is planted in a straight line, but the flowers are all over the place. The other thing is you need to have some plants that are going to protect the pollinators from adverse weather. Remember I said that the bees don't like to fly when it's nasty weather? Well, the honeybees can go back to their hives. But if it's raining, pelting rain or something like that, Butterflies would get torn to pieces, so would the bumblebees. So you want to be able to give them maybe one or two plants that are sturdier than just a herbaceous perennial, so that they can go and hunker down. And adding water to the garden is so important. I love this particular bird bath because, first of all, it's gorgeous. Second of all, it's very shallow. And you want to have a shallow part to the bird bath, or a little mist of water, or you could even have a bird bath that has some gravel in it or some stones in it, so that they don't, any little insect that lands on it will not drown. They'll be able to get the water and fly away safe. So keep in mind, you want to go ahead and get a blend of flowers, get protection, and also lots of water for them. So what to plant? Okay, here's a bunch of annuals. Now the annuals I'm giving you are just in alphabetical form, but ageratums, they're blue, they're fuzzy, they have like, they make like an umbel, and they're just candy to pollinators. Angelonia is also called the summer snapdragon. It looks a little bit like a snapdragon, but smaller flowers, and the pollinators truly love it. Sweet alyssum is a perfect plant to plant, especially in the early springtime. You can find it in whites. Here's a bee on sweet alyssum that's white. It comes in white. It comes in lavenders and blues. It's a great plant to plant around the Easter time, but they have varieties now of sweet alyssum that don't die out in the heat of the summer. It's a brand new variety, and I don't remember what it is. I apologize. I bought it last year, and I planted it in all of my containers, and they cascaded over the container about a foot down, and they bloomed and bloomed and bloomed all summer long. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm buying those again. And borage, again, this is a plant. Yes, it's an edible flower. It could go in an herb garden if you want to, but it also could go in as a regular flower garden. The dianthus, these are carnations. You can have the annual ones, or you could also have the perennial ones, but in the annuals, there's some gorgeous one there. And gazanias, oh, they're really cool. They're a star-like flower, and they're very, very drought tolerant. So they can handle a lot of heat and a lot of dry. So if you have like a desert because you don't have irrigation, but you still want to have pollinators, gazania is a great one to plant. They look like daisies. Okay. Then there's the Burger daisies. Excuse me, that's supposed to be a G. The Gerber daisies. Sorry about that. And that come in the bright colors, the reds, the oranges, and the yellows, and they get so many beautiful pollinators. Marigolds are awesome to plant. When you think about it, as an annual, it starts blooming early, and it blooms all summer. It blooms when the chrysanthemums are blooming, and it continues to bloom after the chrysanthemums die off. So when you buy marigolds, though, you want to get the marigolds that will open up. You don't want to have them with so many petals that they don't actually have any sexual parts. You want one of the old-fashioned ones that open up, and you can actually see the anthers, which is where the pollen is, and the stigma, which is the female part. Nasturtiums, you should always plant from seed. I have tried many times buying them already planted, and they never seem to thrive. But if you plant them from seed into your garden, the flowers are edible, but the bees absolutely love them, and they're really good to eat. The flowers are very spicy. Nicotiana is in the nicotine family, and it is pollinated at night when the fragrance of the flower is amazing. And that's why you have this plant right here with this night blooming Nicotiana, and you have this moth that flies at night to pollinate it. Pentas are wonderful annuals. They're bright red, bright pink. You can get white ones too, but it will just draw in a lot of bees as well as beautiful, beautiful butterflies. And they're great annuals. And salvia, again, here's a beautiful picture of a salvia with a bee on it. Absolutely spectacular. Then again, of course, you have snapdragons, which everyone knows. This is a Nicotiana, and it is called the Mexican sunflower annual, but bright orange with this beautiful, beautiful orange center with all of these little flowers that are truly perfect. And there is a hoverfly over it going, oh my goodness, fabulous. Verbena, again, is a plant that has flowers that are like a bouquet of flowers, really, really good. Vinca is the kind of plant that you have to wait until the soil gets warm before you plant it. Is an annual. If you don't wait until it's warm, it will sit there in the ground, it will rot, it will turn yellow, it will look nasty, and it never really recovers. So when you're planting vinca and it's really raining, wait until it dries out and then plant your vinca out. And always in full sun with really, really good dry, well-drained soil. And then zinnias. Oh my gosh, there's nothing more beautiful than a zinnia, except when you have either a butterfly or a bee on it. Usually I have them with butterflies, but today I have the bees. Now, perennials, these are the ones you plant once, and by its very name, it has to live at least 3 years. And what I'm giving you is a list of herbaceous perennials that bloom in the springtime, in the summer, and the fall, and these are all natives. The only one I'm not 100% sure is the salvia, but I think that it is also. Anyways, so Phlox subulata, this is the moss phlox. It grows on the ground. It's still in bloom right now. I mean, I had it blooming in the wintertime, not that anything was flying, but it blooms early, very, very early. And because of the fact it blooms early, it does bring in the pollinators. It makes a wonderful ground cover in a soft sort of pale green in the wintertime. Sometimes almost a burgundy green in the wintertime. And then in the summer, a really nice green. So once it finishes blooming in the springtime, it's a great border, just sort of to soften up between the plants and the lawn. Aquilegia or columbine, here we go right here. Now this only lives for about 2 to 3 years, but this is our native columbine and it breathes true to seeds. So I would always say when you have the columbine, leave the seeds heads on for at least until everything's dried up and you want to clean up the garden. And you will have so many new seedlings that they will almost become weeds. But remember, a weed is a plant without a good press agent. So Baptisia, this is false indigo, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It comes in blues, it comes in whites, it comes in yellow. And here is a bumblebee pollinating it. And this is one of the ones that they actually have to force their way in, and then they do the buzz thing again. And then the salvia, well, this is Maynight, which is just gorgeous. Okay, then there's also Aquilegia. Okay, this one right here is yarrow, bright gold. A lot of times people just go for the gold with it, and it makes a great plant. Nothing eats it because it has a very strange flavor and fragrance on it, but it's a great plant for pollinators. Asclepias tuberosa, that is the butterfly weed, which is bright orange. It needs full sun and really dry soil. But its cousin, Asclepias anacarta, which is the swamp milkweed right here, is this gorgeous shade of pink. And it thrives only if you give it moist soil. So I have tried planting it many times. I'm really good the first year. I water it religiously. A couple times a week. The first week I have it and then I break it off because when you buy it from the garden center, they're water junkies. And by the middle of summer, I'm watering it 2 to 3 times a week only because the heat is really intense. And the next year I say, okay, you're on your own. Well, it comes up in the springtime and it looks at me like, okay, where's the water? And if I don't water it, it dies. So if you have a rain garden, this is a great plant to plant. Or if you have an area that is always a little bit wet, or if you have gutters and the gutter goes right to a certain area, make sure you plant the swamp milkweed because it will be thrilled. And look at all the critters that are on there. We have little wasps in there, we have bees, and there was a butterfly over here, I think. Coreopsis, these are beautiful natives from out from the west. So they're very drought tolerant. They also love sun. So Coreopsis lanceolata has lance leaf leaves, very long slender leaves. The common name is a tick seed Coreopsis, but that's because the seed looks like a tick. It has nothing to do with bringing them into your garden whatsoever, but they're beautiful flowers. The Coreopsis reticulata, that is the threadleaf Coreopsis with real fine foliage and beautiful, brightly colored yellow flowers, absolutely gorgeous. Again, there's the Echinacea purpurea. This is the one that is the true Echinacea. All the other colors have been bred with the echinacea and other plant material. So this is the one that will always breed true to form and be absolutely gorgeous for you. So that's kind of neat. Heuchera, this is coral bells. Monarda, that is bee balm. Penstemon is, well, they call it penstemon, but they also call it, has a very strange name, bearded tongue. I just think some common names need to be redone. And Rebecca Herta, this is the black-eyed Susan. So these are all great plants that bloom in the middle of summertime. They usually start around June and they just keep on blooming. Then we also have the Transcandia Virginia. This is spiderwort, and people look at it and go, well, I don't want to plant spiders. It's called spiderwort because it looks like it could be a spider, but it's a plant. It's not anything that's really bad. Yucca filamentosa. These are the ones you see at the beach. They have a gorgeous lemon fragrance. And you do have to be careful with yucca when you're working with it. It has very sharp points. One of the common names is Adam's needle. So be sure to wear eye protection, gloves, long pants, long sleeve shirts. Eupatorium, this is Joe Pye. Here it is right here. Look at these beautiful, beautiful swallowtails. Now the swallowtails that are yellow like this, these are the males. And when you see the blue ones with the black, those are the females. She has to hide because she's going to be busy laying eggs and she doesn't want something to eat her while she's laying eggs. These guys will go ahead and flutter around and kind of distract whatever wants to eat them so that the female can get her job done. The hibiscus, these are the beautiful hibiscus or swamp mallows. They like it. These are, again, great plants for rain gardens. And but even if you grow them high and dry, they will still go ahead and give you absolutely beautiful flowers. The common hibiscus or marshmallow plant is white, has a white flower with a red throat on the inside. But the cultivars are absolutely spectacular. You can get them purple, you can get them pink, you can get them red. There's even one that's completely white, totally white, and the pollinators love them. They attract hummingbirds like nobody's business. So I have them on my patio. And when I'm sitting there just quietly reading, I hear this bzzz, and I'm looking for bees, and no, it's a hummingbird. Okay, then there's the lobelia, the cardinal lobelia, that's also called the cardinal flower. And this other lobelia is the blue border lobelia, which is really pretty. Now, the cardinal flower needs to have their feet almost in the water. So they would do good in a rain garden as long as there's always water in there. The blue lobelia is a little bit more able to survive without all that water. Phlox paniculata, this is the garden phlox. I like to have that always when I'm talking about pollinators because the garden phlox will bloom for more than the 2 weeks that most of your perennials will bloom. And this is why I tell people to plant annuals because most of the time perennials bloom for 2, maybe 3 weeks, and that's it. But your garden phlox, the native garden phlox, it will bloom for almost 8 weeks. That's 2 months. So we start in the late part of summer and it goes into the early part of fall. It comes in this gorgeous lavendery pink color. White David is powdery mildew resistant, so you can grow it without having to worry about any of the discoloration of the foliage. Absolutely gorgeous. It comes in pink. It comes in white with like a red throat on the inside. There's so many beautiful ones. Gorgeous. The Solidago canadensis, that is goldenrod, our native goldenrod. Absolutely gorgeous. And this unpronounceable name right here is an aster. So you have the Nova Anguis, which is the New England aster, and you have the Michaelis daisy aster too. So asters bloom in the fall and right about the time that the chrysanthemums bloom, but they're actually much more hardy, I think, than chrysanthemums. Of course, they're native. And the bees, oh my goodness, it sounds like they're having a rock concert when they're in bloom. Okay. There's another heuchera. This is a fall blooming coral bell as opposed to the one that I had in the springtime for you. And this has a totally different flower, but the pollinators absolutely love it. Now this one right here is Laetris, or called blazing star. Now most herbaceous perennials bloom from the bottom up. You can see by this plant right here, it blooms from the top down. These flower buds haven't even begun to open, but all these guys, look at that. They're already open and the pollinators there. Look at that. There's a monarch going, thank you. I'm really, really thirsty. And here's a little honeybee on these. They're very, very drought tolerant. So full sun, and you will get so many beautiful pollinators. And then this one, Veronia novabrensis, this is ironweed. And it's called ironweed because when it's finished flowering, the bracts that hold the flower petals look like rusted iron, which is kind of funny. They are plants that like to be in a rain garden. They can handle in our ditches on the eastern shore, but they would do really, really well in a rain garden. And they bloom in the late summer and are just gorgeous. Okay, so annuals. Why do you plant annuals? Because they bloom all summer. They come in so many different sizes and shapes and colors. And I've gone over a lot of those, but I just wanted to share a couple that I thought were really pretty. Here's bumblebees on marigolds. And notice how these marigolds are open. That's why I have the picture of them. So you can see that there are not so many petals. And you even have wasps, which are sometimes pollinators. They're not as good pollinators as bees are, because for the most part, wasps will go for things like caterpillars. But every now and then they do want some nectar. So they'll go on. This is the mountain mint. And here's some wasps again on fennel that are, they will still go for all of the good stuff. Do I have any questions?
Hey, Ginny.
Yes.
So, can you eat zucchini flowers?
Oh, yes, yes. You can go ahead and eat the zucchini flowers, the pumpkin flowers. Zucchini flowers and garden squash are called squash blossom flowers. People like to dip them in batter and fry them. People like to stuff them with stuff and fry them. There's lots of different recipes. You can Google them.
Cool. Yeah, it's good to know you can eat other parts of the plant, not just the fruit, the vegetable.
Right. Well, and if you're going to eat the flowers, I would eat the male flowers after they've done their pollination.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is one I think that kind of got answered in the chat, but my squash plant, and partially by you. So my squash plant produces beautiful flowers and then they fall off and I don't get any zucchini. Is this because I'm lacking pollinators?
Very much so, yes. Without the pollinators, they're not going to be happy. And this is why I really try to get people to plant a lot of flowers around their vegetable gardens, because you want to introduce the pollinators early in the springtime and get them used to coming to visit the flowers. And then when your squash is in bloom at that point, they're not going to be like out in the middle of a desert and hear these beautiful flowers with nothing to pollinate them.
So then we had a question about herbs. Is yeast like fennel? If you plant fennel, it will stunt and prevent the growth of nearby plants. Learned that lesson a few years ago. So does fennel have that characteristic?
I had planted fennel in my herb garden and I didn't find it stunted anything. Personally, I noticed that it didn't stunt anything. Now, this is not the fennel that you eat. Bronze fennel is more the decorative one. And I liked it because it had that gorgeous shape of like a fountain. It grew up and it like cascaded over. And it was such an attractant for so many pollinators. It was always a buzz, which is kind of fun. But I eventually had to get rid of it because it threw so many seeds out. It was very prolific. But even while it was growing, it didn't seem to stunt anything. So maybe what you're thinking about is it is such a large plant, it does shade out a lot of things. So maybe that's what you're thinking of.
Are there some good flowers to plant for pollinators in fully shaded yards?
Yeah, there are a lot of pollinators you can plant in the shade. I think just thinking about them, perennials, I would say bugleweed blooms in the early springtime. Bergingia blooms in late spring. Let's see what else. There's a lot of daylilies that bloom in the shade and they get pollinators too. There's a lot of, hosta, believe it or not, I know hostas bloom throughout the mid to late summer, all the way through the fall. And every time I look at my hosta, there's a bee enjoying the pollen and the nectar in the flowers. So, and also all the coral bell, they are very shade tolerant. Yeah, I think that you can do fine with the coral bells, the hostas, and the other plants.
All right. Let's see here. I hear people talk about milkweed being a good pollinator attractor, but very ugly. What are your thoughts about this plant?
Oh, okay. Well, I understand that because I personally am not a fan of the color orange. I like reds, I like yellows, but oranges are not my color. It kind of makes me look icky. And so I did not plant Echinacea tuberosa, which is the orange one, for the longest time. And then I finally said, okay, get real. You want your pollinators, just do it, just plant it. And so I plant the Echinacea and excuse me, the tuberosa, and I plant it along with a lot of plants that are blue, because blue is the opposite side of the color wheel from orange. So it makes the orange pop, but it also makes the blue look better too. And I also have a bunch of different daisy-like flowers nearby too. So it really enhances the bees coming to the tuberosa. I think it's kind of an unusual plant, but you can just go ahead and plant it in part of the garden, the sunny part of the garden that you don't have to look at if you don't want to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, it does kind of take over too if you plant it. I know I once had it in the garden.
The perennial common milkweed is a very aggressive one. The Asclepias tuberosa, it has not spread anywhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Getting bees to come and visit your vegetables. So how about planting herbs in containers and placing them around raised beds? I think that was an answer.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a good idea. And the other thing they can do is, like, for instance, if you're going to go ahead and have some raised beds with your vegetables, you can have the flowers planted along the outside. There's a lot of things that will give you a lot of color without taking up a lot of space.
So we have a question here. If your yard attracts birds, will the pollinators be less likely to visit?
Oh, no, I would not say that at all, because birds will coexist. Now, there are going to be birds that are going to go for bugs, but for the most part, they're going to go for probably the caterpillars and not the bees.
Okay. What is the best way to organize and start your seeds indoors?
To organize and start your seeds indoors. Well, okay. You could start planting them right about now indoors. What I would try to do is get the ones that you know that are more cold tolerant. Things like petunias, you can go ahead and get them growing. You can actually put petunias out in the early springtime when there's really cold weather, and they will thrive despite everything. They're kind of crazy that way. But things that are and marigolds are pretty hardy too, but there are things like vinca. You would want to wait until really later in the season, or get them started and just keep them indoors a lot longer, because if you plant them out and it's still cool, they're not going to be happy. You have to wait until that soil feels really hot to the touch. I kind of equate them with like peppers. You never plant your peppers until the soil's really hot to the touch.
So Ginny, would you say a good rule of thumb is start your seeds, maybe like get everything prepared a month before? Start seeds when you anticipate is the right time to put them out in the garden?
At least a month.
Okay.
And when you think about it also, you want to have that time where you can go ahead, and when they're about a month old and they're large enough now, and you've gone ahead and taken them out in a little seed area and you put them in a larger pot, you want to put them outside in the morning, but bring them back in before the sun gets really hot, or put them out where they get morning sun and afternoon shade, and then bring them back in the evening so they can harden off and hardening off is a horrible term, but basically is they get used to being outdoors, where they have to deal with wind and they have to deal with things that come by and all that. So it's just,
there's a lot more sunlight outside too.
Yeah. But early in the summertime or late spring, you still have cool evenings, and you need to get them used to being outdoors first before you get them like dive in the deep end of the pool and just take it, kid. You want to be generous to them, give them a little bit of time outside, then bring them back in, tell them you still love them. And frost dates are important. if you're dealing with any kind of plants that are at all tender at all, I always say wait until after Mother's Day. I mean, it's hard for me to wait until after Mother's Day to plant things. But last year we had a hard frost the day before Mother's Day. And I lost a lot of my plants because I didn't get out there and cover them. Just covering them with like a sheet or a towel or something like that is good. I mean, like, because unless you have floating row covers, and that's perfect too. If you don't, old towels, old sheets, just toss them over and put rocks down so they don't blow away. But you can lose them if you have a late frost.
Okay, we have another question about bee hotels, and I don't even know what these are. So
hold a second, I got one.
Really helpful. Okay. So
Okay.
Ginny might have one.
The beauty of having a video. This is a bee hotel.
Huh. Okay.
So you can get this. Now the ones up here, these would be good for like mason bees and that kind of stuff. And these down here for the smaller holes are for the smaller native bees, real teeny tiny things.
So do you have one of those in your yard? Do you see it, bees visiting it or hanging out there when it's bad weather?
I haven't actually been able to get one from my yard, but what I've done instead is I've planted a zillion flowers. So I figure that, they're going to have to find their own home, but I'm providing the buffet.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool. I didn't even know what that was. So
also the trouble with this one, and I will be honest, this is all good for bees, but this part right here, this would only be good for wasps. And if you don't want wasps, you don't want something like this. This is really pretty, and I think it was sold as a butterfly house too. Butterflies don't use this. They do not. But wasps will go ahead and make a home, and I'm a little bit more, this is not what I want at all.
Yeah, I understand. What are some good plants for poor drainage areas? So you had mentioned, I forget the name.
The swamp milkweed is really, really good.
Okay.
Let's go on back. Let's see. Okay, the ironweed will be good for poor drainage. The Lobelia cardinalis would be good for poor drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Eupatorium, Joe Pye weed, and the hibiscus, both of those would be really, really good for poor drainage.
That's right. Okay.
And the Monarda, they can handle some wet. It's okay. And the swamp milkweed.
I had a question just pop into my head now. These plants, I don't think I've ever seen at garden stores. Maybe they're there. But if I wanted to go out and get some seeds for something like a native hibiscus, where would be a good place to find those?
Oh, okay. Well, you have to have permission to get on somebody's property that's not yours. But I do know that there are some really good people who talk about collecting the seeds and all. For hibiscus, I would go to an area that is a natural swamp. We have a lot of natural swamps in this area. You can go ahead and, collect some there. That would be interesting.
And as
Bring
for
mosquito repellent.
Oh, sorry.
Bring mosquito repellent.
Yeah. As for other kind of specialty seeds, do you have a go-to vendor or a place that sells variety than Home Depot?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good people out there that have good seeds. I deal with a lot of, North Creek Nursery is really good. The Perennial Farm is really good. There's a whole bunch out there. A White Flower Farms has got beautiful plants. And I'm just popping up with some names that I know. But I mean, there's a lot of them out there. Well, what I would suggest is just talk to people and say, also, I would say visit your local garden center. There's always going to be more than the box stores. The box stores are fine, but there's a lot of really good, fabulous garden centers all around Maryland, no matter what county that you're in. And I like the idea of supporting the local ones because, hey, they're local people in buying local plants, and they might have a better idea of what will grow. What comes up from the box stores comes up, the box store, truck is loaded up in Florida and it's brought up all the way to Maine and then it's brought down again. So if you shop with a local market, I think you'll get a better idea of what really grows in the area.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've got kind of a long question here. I live directly across from a very large cornfield who hires a plane to spray insecticides. I always notice that after that, there are never any more bees present in my garden, even if I have done everything they like. Is there anything I can do to protect them or get them to come back?
Okay. I think
this is a little bit tough.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what crop the corn would have for spraying. Maybe corn earworm, but most of the time, don't they use BT? I'm a commercial horticulturist. I don't deal with corn, wheat, and soybeans all that much. But
most corn is going to be BT nowadays.
Yes, so that wouldn't be it. Emily, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for the most part, they wouldn't be spraying for corn earworm once the ears start coming in. I can't think of anything they'd be spraying late into the summer.
Yeah, I don't, I
unless
don't
it's
see
weed control.
them spraying over corn at all. So I don't know. I mean, I've seen them spray over soybeans sometimes because there's like different loopers and stuff like that. But research has shown if they go ahead and plant flowers near soybeans, they actually get a better crop of soybeans, and also you have more beneficial control over the loopers too.
I guess maybe if they were growing some kind of sweet corn, they might still be spraying because some of that isn't BT.
So in that sense, what I would try to do is have like a hedgerow of spring and summer flowering plant material between your house and the cornfield.
And do you think field watch would be useful at all for somebody like this, or is that only designed for farmers?
I think that's designed for farmers.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Huh.
Now, she could look into the sensitive area where, like, for instance, she is sensitive to pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what she should do, she should talk to her local farmer and find out, first of all, what are you spraying? And find out if he could kind of stick away from where she is. I mean, if he's got a huge farm, he can go ahead and leave the last, rows untouched.
Yeah.
I know that my farmer does that. I have I'm surrounded by crops where I live, and I don't even ask. I mean, the guys are so careful. Make sure when the wind is in the right direction, away from where I live.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if they know that you're concerned about it, and,
yes.
If you talk to them, they can talk to the pilot who's spraying their fields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you think about it, a farmer does not want anything, whether he's putting a fungicide or a pesticide or an insecticide. He doesn't want to waste that chemical. It costs too much to waste that chemical. And if he can get away with spraying a little bit less, it's always a good idea to make friends with your farmer. First of all, I mean, he's your neighbor, but second of all, you get to know what he's doing and he gets to understand where you're coming from.
Okay, I've got one more on my list here. Any good online resources about pollinators? Do you have anything you suggest?
I like the Museum Botanical Garden. They have it's a great website. I would say probably all of the different botanical gardens probably have their own websites also. Anytime you visit a new botanical garden, no matter where in the United States you are, check to see what resources they have and check to see if they have a website you can get on. Some of them are fabulous.
Can you say that again, Ginny? I'm trying to
the
look.
Missouri Botanical Garden.
Missouri. Okay.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is fabulous. And what's nice about it is that when they're talking about when the plants are blooming, it's right about the same time that the plants in Maryland bloom.
Okay. Yeah, they're kind of around the same latitude as us.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And they'll tell you whether the plants are native or where they're from, that sort of thing, which is I always find that nice because, like, for instance, if something is like, for instance, tulips are from Turkestan and Kazakhstan, and that means that they like it to be cold in the winter and cool in the summer. And that's not the Eastern Shore of Maryland. It's hot in the summertime. That's when my tulips don't thrive, but I have some that do.
Oh, what is a safe place for butterflies during the rain?
Oh, okay. Like if you have some shrubs, they can be evergreen or deciduous shrubs. They provide a lot of leaf material. And like, for instance, just choose something like forsythia, which is not a native plant, but any type of plant that you want to have that blooms, whether it blooms in the spring or the summer or the fall, like a viburnum or something like that, the amount of foliage that's there will give it protection. And if it's in bloom, that's even better because it'll already be there to get the nectar and pollen and all that. But the sheer size of a shrub is large enough to go ahead and provide protection from the rain.
This is a great question. Have you written a book with any of this info? They're saying that your pictures look like they're from a book.
I have not had time to write a book, but thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
And you do write for a couple of magazines. And...
Yes, I do. I write for a number of different magazines. The other thing I do, which is fun for me, is I have the ability to go ahead and film a half-an-hour video show called Delmarva Gardens, and you can find it online because it's a YouTube video. And I also do Delmarva Life once a month, a little small segment that's like 3 to 5 minutes, and that's basically something fun. Just something fun.
This may be in regards to something else. Are they bringing bees in and taking back after pollution? I think this might be about something.
Maybe about pollinating. A lot of times the bees, the honeybees, which are managed bees, do have a lot of issues that they're dealing with now that they didn't have to deal with 100 years ago. 100 years ago, the European honeybee was here and it didn't have any other competition other than our native bees, which are just different bees. So they all coexisted very, very nicely together. We are now in a world where whatever is next door to us geographically can actually be on the other side of the world and then be right next to us. So we have been introduced to different problems from bees from other areas other than Europe. And they have brought in things like different insects, like the Verano mite and the trachea mites, and they feed on the bees. These are insects that are feeding on the insect. Well, actually, they're mites, but they're still feeding on the bees, and they are also passing over lots of different diseases and viruses and bacteria and stuff like that. And so the bees are having to deal with that. And then since we manage them, we load them up on trucks and we take them from Florida all the way up to Maine and then back down again, because that on the East Coast, you start in Florida where there's all the strawberry crops that are bloom early in the early springtime to us, where it's still winter. And then as it gets warmer further north, the bees move further north and until it gets up to the blueberries up in Maine. But on the West Coast, from west of the Mississippi, almost all the bees west of Mississippi get loaded up on tractor trailers and sent to the almond trees. And the almond fields or the almond trees don't take up acres. They take up miles and miles and miles. I had a chance to visit them one time. Oh my gosh, just miles and miles. And that is it's only a one-time crop and there's nothing else for them. So they have to be brought in to fertilize that crop, and then they load them back and bring them back home. So the bees are sort of suffering sometimes from jet lag. Plus they're getting to be a buzz with other bees from other beekeepers that might not have been so good about taking care of the different mites and the different diseases. And we don't inoculate bees.
A question about a particular plant here. So you had mentioned carpet bungleweed. I understand that it was an invasive species list on the Mid-Atlantic area, for the Mid-Atlantic area. It's on a watch list for Maryland too. Do you have any thoughts about that, or?
Oh, you're right. There are some plants
Nice.
that are on those lists and all that. But the question was, what would thrive in a really shady area? So you have to be wise enough to decide what you're going to plant and how you're going to take care of it. If I had a really shady area that backed into a woods that wasn't mine, I would never ever plant anything like that close to it, simply because it could escape. But if I am in have a house that has a sunny area, but I have one little shady area, I could go ahead and plant it in that shady area, provided I gave it enough moisture, and it would thrive there, but it wouldn't ever go anywhere further than that because of the fact that I'm surrounded by so much sunshine. So you can go ahead and plant some plants that are on those lists as long as you know how to take care of it. It's just like if I had English ivy or something like Japanese barberry. First of all, I will never plant Japanese barberry, not because it's invasive. I just don't like those thorns, and I would have to prune them. They're nasty. But a barberry planted in full sun is not usually a problem. If you plant it in the shade, that is when the seeds of the barberry become much, much more fertile, I guess is a good word for it. But anyways, when they're eaten by the birds and then the birds fly into the woods, which is near the shade where you are, those seeds are much more viable as opposed to the seeds that are on the barberry in full sun. So a lot of it is just common sense. If you know the plant needs to be in full sun, don't plant it in the shade. If it starts to get to be a shady area, move it out of the way. I have seen areas where Japanese barberry has taken over the woods simply because somebody planted it originally in the shade. So you do have to be aware of them, but also do a little bit more work, do a little bit more education on why it is so invasive.
Yeah, I think that's another reason why it's a good idea to, like you were saying, visit your local garden stores, because I think places like Home Depot and Lowe's, like the bigger box stores, that they're there to sell plants, and they don't necessarily hire experts that know native species. So I think you're right to suggest local stores, because they might be able to tell you, some of the downsides of something you want to buy too.
Right.
Whether or not it's invasive. Well, it looks like I don't see any more questions, but we have a long chat going. So if there's any last burning thing that you want to ask Ginny, put it in the chat real quick here. And otherwise, any last final thoughts, Ginny?
Oh, get as many flowers as you want, plant as many of them as you can.
Yeah, I think just having a sheer, like a load of variety for bees and butterflies to choose from, that's how you really bring them in.
Right. And I know a lot of people say, I don't have the time or anything like that. Containers, large containers, don't have to be filled all the way up with soil. I usually get like a large hanging basket that I keep year after year, put new soil in all the time, and I replant it. So I have a whole bunch of flowers that will cascade down, that will fill in the middle, or that will be up in the area. So they have it, what call it, the thriller, the filler, and the spiller. But I mean, you can have that. It could be for the shade with some flowers, but mostly foliage. But in the sunshine, you can have so many beautiful annuals as well as perennial flowers that will bloom and bloom and bloom. And you don't have much more to deal with than a couple of containers. And it was still really good for the pollinators.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for attending. And we recorded this, so we'll either use this recording or 7 o'clock recording, and we'll post that on YouTube within the week or so. So if you want to watch again or catch any of these, also, if you want a copy of the slides, you can email me after the presentation and I'll send you the link. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Emily. I'm going to end the meeting.
Hi, guys. You need me to come help tonight as well?
Ginny, what do you think?
I think it'd probably be okay.
I